You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
February 1847, Mexico. A cloud of dust. The captain came. I pointed to this rising cloud and I told him where I thought it came from. The captain agreed. It's possible. It's Santa Anna's army coming right at us. The colonel was summoned, and he looked and said, "It's cattle, you fools. Troops of cattle." But then, the horsemen were visible, and the colonel changed his tune. "Saddle up, goddamn you." Yet no advance, no threat, no more sights, and scouts sent out see nothing but old camps. Who were these horsemen? What was this dust? Nonetheless, the colonel orders all to horse, and we went all off. We seemingly cleared the place, when a rocket whizzed in the air. It was answered by the boom of a heavy gun. A faint new moon gave a weird light. We rushed into the fight. It was not, cavalry officer Sam Chamberlain would say in his account, that organized. Horses fell into prairie dog holes. Men were thrown. The artillery bounced. Our artillery bounced like playthings. Our advance wasn't off at speed. We reached the pass, and we were fired upon by what would turn out to be our own pickets. After they fired, they ran for the camp. They brought the news, hopefully, of their mistake to camp, so when we marched in, we were not conquerors, but friends. And there, sitting by a fire, is General Zachary Taylor. "Doggerel, I knew it was you." We sleep for an hour at camp, and then, the boots and saddles, they prepared for a fight. The Mexican army. The whole thing is coming our way. Said General Wool, we should fall back towards a pass which could be defended. Zachary Taylor wouldn't hear it. He was for fighting where we are. "I'll be damned if I run away," he said. Now the engineers try and explain. The enemy can put artillery on those hills, and they can fire at us as they choose from one end to the other. Wool and Taylor have words. The former says he'll send troops back on his responsibility. Taylor tells him to do that, then fine. Indeed, Sam Chamberlain's suspicions are right. Santa Anna has decided to challenge Zachary Taylor's now smaller army with a huge force. Now, if you remember the history here, we talked about it briefly, that Polk, for the president, sent General Taylor from Texas downward, southward, through the disputed area, and then to keep going until he found the Mexican army. Which he did at Matamoros, a little fight, and then a big fight at Monterrey, which he took. And he kept advancing. He's told to hold, and then further he's told to give some of his troops to General Scott, who's going to advance on Mexico City from Veracruz, which he has conquered after landing there by sea. Two-part operation, and Zachary Taylor's job is to hold where he is. But he decides to advance and not to give those troops to Scott. Thank you very much. If he was to shed his force, Zachary Taylor feels he would lose all the gains that he's made. Well, now perhaps this whole plan's a mistake, because Santa Anna, president, dictator, head of the Army of Mexico, has decided to knock out the two U.S. armies one by one, and he's going to take out Zachary Taylor's army with overwhelming force. He sends a note to Taylor. "You are surrounded. You cannot, in any human probability, avoid a rout here. Zachary Taylor addressed the person who sent it. Tell him he can go to hell. Chamberlain continues, I doubt that the sun of Austerlitz, the sun that day on that battle, lit up a more brilliant spectacle than all the Mexican army displayed before us. $20,000 men clad in new uniforms, felt as white as snow, brass and arms burnished until they glittered like silver and gold. $6,000 cavaliers' uniforms of blue and red with their gleaming lances. It looked like they could ride down and finish us off, finish the war with one blow. A procession of Catholic dignitaries accompanies this army, and bands played a solemn anthem. The air was now so clear that we could see every movement. They knelt down for the benediction. Meanwhile, there was not a chaplain in our army. Lines were formed, the Americans on a plateau. An attack on the right is made. Captain Washington poured into their ranks with such a rapid fire of shell and canister that whole lines seemed to sink at every discharge. Now every Mexican gun opens up in return, and some volunteers on the U.S. side are running. They are escorted back by regular troops. It seems like an artillery, cavalry, and skirmish fight, but the problem is the ground is not flat, but has ravines, which mask movement. Then they see the snow-white caps. An entire division was sent without the army seeing it. We are deafened by the roar of musketry. Fired back, and since the Mexicans have the advantage of firing under a ravine, Americans of Kentucky and Illinois regiments are laid flat. All of a sudden, Chamberlain says, an officer orders to cease fire and retreat. His regiment does, and others start moving back, including artillery. And Chamberlain says, soon our rear was a confused mass, making their way to Buena Vista. But in this moment, Lieutenant O'Brien, Paul Jones O'Brien, advanced his guns to within 50 yards of the exultant foe and opened with canister on the multitude. The trouble was artillery advancing like this is risky. Oh, it's all good when you get your chance to fire. You can really do some damage. But if you don't have enough ballistic force to push the army back and force them to retreat, they're coming at you, and there's little you can do to defend. They loaded the guns again with double charges of canister and threw in handfuls of stones. Horrid lines were cut through the hostile enemy columns. It didn't stop the Mexican cavalry, though. Paul Jones O'Brien is only rescued by General Wool and the 2nd Illinois, so the artillery could withdraw their guns. Desperate fighting now, at close range, rifle clubs, lances, back and forth. Take a bit of plain, a little edge of a hill, and they take it back. Cavalry, infantry, back and forth. Taylor arrives on the field with the Mississippi Rifles, Chamberlain says. He also sees Jefferson Davis, West Point graduate, who formed his men on the upper plateau in the shape of the letter V, opening towards the foe, flanking from the gulches. I heard Taylor say, "Sturdy boys," as the Mexican lancers attacked, the sharp crack of their rifles. Taylor said, "We're done, Jeff. Hurrah for Mississippi." But despite some heroics, the Mexican army is not stopping. Constant attacks, up and down the line. For every one that goes down, they have more. Very little U.S. troops can fill in these gaps in the lines. The advantage the United States Army has is its well-functioning, well-staffed, movable artillery, and broken up in groups, not just in one place. It's all over this battlefield. It's usefully moved around the line to accommodate resistance to attacks. But as Chamberlain says, despite all of this, the masses of Mexican infantry rushed in the face of our guns and gradually drove us back. He sees desperate fighting by an American regiment, caught in one of the ravines, caught in a pocket by a larger enemy force. It is that of Henry Clay Jr., the son of the senator, who was killed in battle. They made 4 attempts to take our batteries. All were futile. It's a whole day of fighting in Buena Vista. Fighting stops that night, but there is no sleep. Chamberlain says, it was a cold night. Corpses strewn, picket line of lancers stationed 200 yards from me. I could hear them humming and riding back and forth. All of a sudden, though, he looks into the night. It doesn't see those pickets 200 yards away. Movement is taking place. It takes a while to confirm, but they do. Santa Anna's army is leaving. It was a sight more lovely than the fairest woman in the world. The Battle of Buena Vista was not planned. President Polk had, sensing perhaps that the general was building up too much a reputation in the press, ordered him to stay where he was and give his army to General Scott, some of it. Instead, he moved south. I note that there is a town in New Jersey, one of several towns, named Buena Vista, that was incorporated around this time. There's also a town called Rio Grande. Residents there call it Buna instead of Buena, but it's named after the battle. This battle would receive a lot of attention in the American press. It's a huge victory. Good for America, but doubly good, because he doesn't just take on Santa Anna. He takes on, in a sense, President Polk. Here's Zachary Taylor I believe this is a letter to his son-in-law. I am satisfied that Scott, Marcy, and company had been more anxious to break me down than they have to break down Santa Anna. By pursuing the course I did, I saved the honor of the country. Had I left at the time referred to, at the Battle of Buena Vista, it never would have been fought. And had not that been fought and won, Santa Anna would have swept the whole country. The best informed portion of the Mexicans in this part of the country say there will be peace in a few months, to which I say amen with all my heart. We talked about last episode how Zachary Taylor has now entered a different battlefield, perhaps just as perilous. You have kind of a 5-sided problem, but with 2 parts of it being most of the problem, and all of it relating to new territories that have entered the Union after the completion of the war of which Zachary Taylor was so big a part. They could not be solved during Polk's administration. And they couldn't entirely be solved in Congress. In fact, as Zachary Taylor's taking office, Congress isn't meeting yet, and Congress will sit at the end of the year. And in fact, in 1849, when it does, it takes 5 weeks to elect a speaker, because so torn is the country between Democrats, Whigs, Northern Democrats, Southern Whigs, and Free Soilers that there aren't enough votes to elect any one speaker. And it takes over 60 votes over 5 weeks. And finally, some of the Free Soilers, enough of them, accept that we can have a plurality vote instead of a majority vote for speaker. And thereby, without Free Soilers directly electing Hal Cobb as speaker, a pro-slavery Democrat from Georgia, who nonetheless is not a Calhounite. This, as we said, has many layers and contours. He's sort of allowed to become speaker just to end the crisis by the Free Soilers. Many are mad at them. How could you let this happen? But Zachary Taylor has a plan, and it's issued. He's sort of holding it. He gave a little hint in Pennsylvania, as we talked about, if there was any doubt. Some of the people are noticing that he's allowed William Seward to start coming to some cabinet meetings. He's not a member of the cabinet. William Seward is a northern anti-slavery expansionist senator from New York. He's in with Thurlow Weed, the Whig boss. It's kind of appears, has all the elements of this kind of political ploy to keep that group in his support. They have been controlling the patronage in New York, what patronage is coming from the Taylor administration. Zachary Taylor had not wanted to get into his administration and start firing everyone, but he does appoint some positions. And then he drops his message. Here's Holt Hamilton. The message had been written in November, its authorship variously ascribed to Secretary of State Clayton or Meredith or Bullitt. Of these, the President and the Treasury Secretary Ewing had a finger in the pie. But 9/10 of the message added up to a competent, if pedestrian, recital of Taylor's policy, with somewhat over half devoted to international affairs. He talks about relations with Great Britain, France, even though there's an episode we're going to talk about. He talks about the German-Danish episode. He talks about how he stopped Lopez and his intriguers from taking over Cuba. He says he would have been gladly the first to welcome the independent Hungary into the family of nations if it would have happened. He talks about the Indian agencies, about rivers and harbors, Army and Navy affairs, the tariff, the sub-treasury systems, all the things that a 19th century president would put in his message. And then near the middle of the message, which clerks are going to be reading to Congress and Congress is listening to, Taylor recalled that the 30th Congress failed to provide civil rule for California, and Taylor says that's unacceptable. The people of that territory, impelled by their political conviction, met in convention for the purpose of forming a state government. Latest advices give me a reason to suppose that this has been accomplished, and it is believed they will shortly apply for admission to the Union. Should such be the case, and should their Constitution be conformable to requisitions of the Constitution of the United States, I recommend their application to the favorable consideration of Congress. Point number 1 of the President's plan. Then, he says, New Mexico's people, also it will be believed at no very distant period, present themselves for admission to the Union. Taylor doesn't specifically sponsor statehood, but hints at it, since this is what he said about California, that we should allow it. Preparatory to the admission of California and New Mexico, the people of each will have instituted a republican form of government, laying its foundations in such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. By awaiting their action, all causes of uneasiness may be avoided, and confidence and kind feeling preserved. But then he says this one line. We should abstain from the introduction of those exciting topics of a sectional character which have hitherto produced painful apprehensions in the public mind. And he repeats the solemn warning of the first and most illustrious of his predecessors, he's talking about George Washington, against furnishing any ground for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations. For more than a half century, the Union has stood unshaken. Its dissolution would be the greatest of calamities. Whatever dangers may threaten it, I shall stand by it and maintain its integrity to the full extent of obligations imposed and powers conferred upon me by the Constitution. There's not a lot to directly argue with, which makes it difficult for opponents at the outset. It's a very respectful, calm message, but in terms of everyone reading between the lines, it's hitting a lot of people like a lead balloon, so to speak. Because what Zachary Taylor offers as his plan is to simply let California into the Union with no extra qualifications on it, conditions on its approval for statehood. That's up to California. And then he expands that to New Mexico. So there's 3 issues there. People from slaveholding states are going to know that California is going to be out as a free state, get 2 senators, and also make the country have more free states than there are slave states. New Mexico would probably increase that the same way. The other problem is that New Mexico is in a dispute where Texas disputes the boundary of what is U.S. territory and its own state sovereign land in New Mexico. It disputes it strongly. It considers the area around even Santa Fe part of Texas. And so a seemingly innocuous message just talking about, hey, let these good things happen and there'll be new states and, you know, let's be Whiggish and not interfere with things is actually a pretty strong message and is going to start a bubbling fight. Because what's happening at the same time as this, and isn't caused by Zachary Taylor, is the whole Calhoun movement. And the Calhoun movement is one of Southern rights, and that there should be perhaps a special right for this region given its situation. Here's Edwin P. Hoyt. He's writing in 1966. The Southerners had reached a moment of crisis. In the beginning of 1850, the United States consisted of 30 states, 15 slave, 15 free. The population was growing more rapidly in the North than the South, which meant that the number of Northern members of the House of Representatives would outnumber the Southerners and overwhelm them. In the Senate, though, the South had protection, because each state sent an equal amount. But as long as the ratio between slave and free states could be maintained, it would not be a problem. So the Southern members of the House and Senate, seeing California coming in, they're particularly incensed because California had adopted a constitution with outlawed slavery. Some Southerners went as far as to accuse Zachary Taylor of a plot in which he sent in Northerners and kept Southerners out of California and ordered the Northerners to draw up an anti-slavery constitution. That is nonsense. Stated openly on the floors of Congress shows how incensed the reckless Southern members have become. Then you have former Vice President Calhoun. Believing the time had arrived for arresting Northern aggression, Calhoun had written in April, the South must present an unbroken front to the North in a convention of Southern states. The function of this front was to give Northerners the alternative of dissolving the Union or ceasing to violate our rights. Pick one. We must force the issue on the North. The sooner it is done, the better. It has to be said that Calhoun's not getting most congressional members from the South to go with his position. He might get listened to. His ideas might be important with their constituents, but they're not listening. Hal Cobb considers Calhoun to be one of the worst people, even though he himself's a slave owner and he's Speaker of the House. So, he doesn't get very far legislatively, but he keeps attracting attention and this sort of like South at any cost, slavery everywhere. I need to be able to bring my livestock, my people who are not people, everywhere in any state that's considered part of this union, and you can't interrupt me. That kind of policy is what Calhoun's for, and he even proceeds with ideas like maybe there should be 2 presidents, and a Southern president and a Northern one, and they can veto each other.
Here's Blumenthal about Taylor's message. Nearly everyone on all sides was stunned. Politics instantly organized along new lines, either for or against the president. Northern Whigs embraced his plan. Southern Whigs felt betrayed. And Calhoun and his followers, after spearheading a resolution through the Mississippi legislature, announced a Southern convention to be held in June in Nashville to defy Taylor. A replay of Calhoun's nullification drama against President Andrew Jackson that had ended with Calhoun's humiliation. Now he planned to outflank and defeat this president. So we talked about Calhoun, and he's a major factor. His reaction to Taylor's message is that it's unworkable, it's not going to work. It's a confirmation of what Calhoun felt about Taylor's election in 1848. A lot of people had come to him saying that, hey, Taylor's a Southerner, we've got to support the Southerner, and Calhoun wanted no part of that. South Carolina ends up voting for Cass, the other candidate. This confirms his suspicions at that time. Having kind of talked about Calhoun's reaction, which is fury, let's also look at, on the other side of things, Hannibal Hamlin, a senator from Maine. Hannibal Hamlin doesn't get much due because all he's known as is Lincoln's rather insignificant vice president. But if we're talking at this time that I'm talking of, Hannibal Hamlin is actually the greater figure in Washington politics right now. He's a very well-established senator. His view of Taylor's words is very positive. The president, in his recent message, has recommended the admission of California as a free state and has left the residue of the Mexican acquisition unorganized. In that I concur. Because it leaves freedom where freedom is. It surrenders nothing. It concedes nothing. It preserves the equality of states and the rights of man inviolate. And what Hamlin means is, by the laws of Mexico, by the fundamental act of her republic, slavery was abolished. That law accompanies the soil we acquired from her. It stands today unrepealed, unrevoked, unassailed, except by the propositions of men who would transplant slavery where it never existed. So this is a very important. Hamlin is a Wilmot Proviso supporter. In other words, how can you add a restriction on freedom to land where it has been not known? Mexico didn't allow this process. We conquered that land. Now, you know what Calhoun's going to say. You know what Jefferson Davis is going to say. Who cares? We conquered them. It's our land now. But Hamlin's putting forth an important principle that is really very well recognized in the North. We can maybe understand that there's got to be some type of negotiations over peculiar institutions that exist in certain states now, and not go around with a hammer and break everything. How can you turn a man who is free and make them a slave? How can you do this to new lands where these laws didn't exist? That's Hamlin's point. And then we've got to consider a third figure, and that is Henry Clay. Henry Clay it's pretty clear, is not happy with the Taylor Compromise. He's coming in remember we talked about how Crittenden, who was Taylor's good friend, always advising him, always supported him, Whig senator from Kentucky, is made governor of Kentucky. Henry Clay then runs for that Senate seat, and the legislature, of course, grants it to him. Popular figure. So now Henry Clay's on the scene. Crittenden, incidentally, doesn't think it's a good thing that Clay has reappeared as a senator. He thinks this is going to cause trouble for the Taylor administration, and pretty soon after Taylor launches his message, it's clear that it will Immediately January 4th, 1850, according to the Congressional Globe, Clay says, "It is not the admission of one state that disturbs this union. It is the agitation of the whole territorial question." The message of the president proposes no general plan for the adjustment of those questions which have so long agitated and divided the people. He recommends the admission of California and leaves all else to the course of time. I cannot consent thus to adjourn the great questions which so much concern the harmony of the Union. We're told that the people of New Mexico are to take care of themselves. Sir, to leave them thus is to invite disorder and perhaps bloodshed. I want to point out, incidentally, that concern, in quotes, over New Mexico is one of the factors that led it to be not a state for another 60 years. It was that thinking that the area of New Mexico is always a lawless place. Put that aside. What you see here is that Henry Clay immediately is not pleased with the president's message of, say, leave it alone, and has other ideas. And just so you see the crossfire here, so Jefferson Davis, who at this point is a lieutenant for Calhoun, is going to say, Henry Clay just used the word evil, the root of evil, when he talked about slavery. This man is the most injurious to the South of all. So you see the way there's crossfire now. So Davis hits Clay. So all of this Senate action is going to bubble up into what textbooks label the Compromise of 1850. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode because it does deserve a lot of time. However, I will say at the outset, I don't agree with that labeling. And many historians, and it's not a new thing, many historians don't agree that there was a so-called Compromise of 1850, and we'll get into all of that. Right now, to truly set the scene of what it's like for a presidency to happen in real life, so to speak, we have to talk a bit about foreign policy, and we have to talk a bit about scandal. And we'll start with foreign policy. I mentioned in the last episode that the Taylor administration, whatever people think of this kind of short-lived president, he ended up dealing with every major country in the world in his time in some way. We talked about Britain, Austria, and Spain. There's also an incident in Portugal. Today I'm going to talk about France and Germany, but I think they both involved a similar thing, is that the United States goes down, conquers Mexico, takes land from it. This is being observed by all these major powers with consequences. We talked about Britain. Now we're going to talk about France. Here's Edwin P. Hoyt. It began over a very small matter of damages to a French citizen caused by American forces in Mexico. Nearly reached a state of war. France had sent to the United States as minister a man with little diplomacy and much spleen. His name was William Tell Poussin. Minister Poussin brought to the attention of the United States this Mexican case, and soon after another case involving a shipwreck and salvage rights off the coast of Latin America. He did not feel, apparently, that his claims were receiving adequate attention. On April 12th, the Secretary of State informed the minister that his last letter was so offensive it would not be accepted. So John Clayton, the Secretary of State, tells Poussin, I'm not accepting your letter. It's not written in that formality that we expect between two nations that are friendly. It was withdrawn, and Poussin rewrites it, but it's soon followed by an even more offensive letter. Conferring, Secretary Clayton and President Taylor decide to try and keep this from becoming an open international issue by laying the entire correspondence before, this is going to be a familiar name, the foreign minister in the cabinet of Louis Napoleon. He's running France at this time. His minister is Alexis de Tocqueville. We're going to remember him because he writes a book about America that's very important to American history and politics. Well, right now, he's the foreign minister of France. Well, they're expecting to get a good, hey, this guy likes America, Tocqueville, right? Here's what happens. Tocqueville criticizes Secretary of State Clayton for the use of undiplomatic language and made no move to recall his minister. Then they hear from Zachary Taylor himself. Taylor orders Clayton to dismiss Poussin as persona non grata.
The French retaliates by refusing to receive Taylor's new American minister, William C. Rives. Taylor becomes angry and refuses to make any conciliatory gesture. And that would have been his move. We make a move, the French make a move. The next step is the Americans do something, perhaps conciliatory. Zachary Taylor decides to skip this step, but in skipping it, it's very loud in diplomatic circles, and wars have been started over less. Here's Edwin P. Hoyt again. Fortunately, Louis Napoleon showed a level head. He disregarded his ministers and received Minister Rives personally in a cordial interview. Honor satisfied, Zachary Taylor was eager to resume friendly relations, and in a message to Congress, he went out of his way to mention the long history of cordial relations with France. Here's another matter that he has to deal with. In 1849, there's a strong movement inside Canada for union with the United States, which met with approval from many who had accepted the manifest destiny ideas of Andrew Jackson and Democrats. These people wanted expansion of the United States in every direction. The matter became serious enough, and the threat of American private expeditions of fighting men became probable enough that the British minister in Washington asked the State Department what the government attitude would be. President Taylor responds, "I will send troops to the border to stop any military adventure." The British authorities see what Zachary Taylor is doing to crush the Lopez and other filibustering. The British are on top of foreign policy in the world and events in the world at this time. They realize that that's a credible factor. It's definitely a Whig policy, and you see a different policy because you had a Whig president. We're not sure what President Cass would do in a case like this. We reference Portugal. There's another case where it goes all the way back to the War of 1812. In Portuguese waters, the British had destroyed a ship. Portuguese had for many years ignored this claim. It's a ship called the General Armstrong. And eventually, and it's during Taylor's administration that they formally reject it. Here's what Taylor does. This is Edward P. Hoyt. President Taylor grew more annoyed. The matter dragged on until March 1850, when a warship was sent to Libsyn with instructions to James Clay, the charge of affairs. He was told to inform the Portuguese government that unless satisfaction was received within 20 days, he would break off his relations with the government and leave. Meanwhile, the warship was ordered to remain in Libsyn Harbor. Some days later, the Portuguese agreed to arbitrate and pay all the other claims against their government. Another serious problem was posed for the United States when the new government confederation tried to buy a warship in the United States for use in a war against Denmark. So Germany's fighting Denmark, and they want to buy a warship in the United States. The Polk administration had begun a program of cooperation with the Germans. President Polk had sent Commodore Parker to Europe to confer with German officers, and he authorizes the Brooklyn Navy Yard to convert a merchant vessel into a warship for the Germans. When the war between Germany and Denmark seemed imminent, even Polk had backed off, at least to the extent of changing his mind about the use of American officers in the German Navy. For a time he had agreed that they could. By the time there's time to do something about the ship, there's a change in administration, and one of President Taylor's earliest actions was to stop conversion of the warship at Brooklyn and to demand a bond from the German government promising that the ship would not be used for warlike purposes. Last thing we'll talk about in this episode, I think is critical for understanding Zachary Taylor and critical for all the actions that are going to happen with the compromise, but yet no one remembers it. And it's called the Golphin Affair. It's a somewhat routine matter. The Golphin family were fur traders in Georgia, mistreated by the British. Georgia pledged to take care of these people for being patriots. This is, by the way, during the Revolutionary War, and it's still an open issue in 1850. And they took lands from the British for this purpose after the Revolution. And the Georgia state legislature pledged the lands that they seized from the British to people like the Golphins, who had extended their own money, their credit, their service. But they were very friendly. This was a pioneer family that had good relationship with the local Indians and traded with them and were very
expert at diplomacy there and getting the Indian tribes around the area to side with the Patriot cause, or at least lay off. And this was what they were being rewarded for. And you're thinking, what does this have to do with Zachary Taylor? Here's where it takes effect. The Golfins have a claim against the United States that Zachary Taylor is president of because in the 1790s, the land that they were going to sell to help all these patriots, the state of Georgia commits to the federal government. Georgia, in effect, washes their hands of the claim with the family. The family then pursues the claim with the United States. So from 1773 to 1836, they keep pursuing this claim and they receive nothing. But in later years, Congress began looking at such claims, and the Golfins had a lawyer. The lawyer's last name is Crawford. He also happens to be Zachary Taylor's Secretary of War. So Zachary Taylor himself has got nothing to do with it except for one small comment, probably a mistake. In fact, he's at odds with his war secretary, George Crawford, politically, right now at the time that this issue really livens up. But Crawford's in the cabinet like so many choices Zachary Taylor had to make because he had to provide sectional balance on the cabinet. And Crawford wins the claim for the Golfins at $43,000. It's a lot of money. And as a lawyer, his fee is one half of that. A lot of money. But this is during the Polk administration, and Congress approves this fee. So what has this got to do with Taylor? Now in the cabinet, Crawford keeps pursuing the Golfin claim, and the family wants interest on this money. The interest is more than this amount. The interest is, over these accumulated years, 5 times that principal. And, by the way, Crawford's fee is going to be 5 times that principal. So Zachary Taylor's new Treasury Secretary is not sure what to do. He defers to his comptroller. The comptroller says no. When there is a protest, Secretary Meredith says, just pay the interest, since the claim just pay 14 years of interest. So this means the way that he determines this is that it's 14 years from when the claim was actually presented to the United States. So just pay that interest, not interest going all the way back to the family's dealings with Georgia. It seems fair. Secretary Meredith is not done, though. He's a little unsure on this determination, and he asks the Attorney General, Reverdy Johnson. And Reverdy Johnson says, he looks at it, of course, and says that a similar Virginia case was paid for in full interest, and this must be the government its answer. The government must answer fully to all just demands. And so, the Golfins receive $191,000, and Crawford gets half. In case you're wondering, it's $10 million, maybe more, in today's dollars. So he's getting $5 million from that. And let's say more than a few eyebrows are raised. And so in what seems like a matter of paperwork and legal matters and people checking with each other, you've now involved 3 members of Zachary Taylor's government in a blemish. The tumult over the administration is now in full gear over Golfin. Secretary Crawford says, look, I call for an investigation. If you think something's wrong, have Congress investigate it. Well, the problem is Congress is not like a group of judges. It's not a fair, impartial body. In fact, during the Taylor administration, Congress is going to be in control of the opposite party, the Democrats. So everybody's looking for an angle, and the question really does come down to, what did Zach know and when did he know it? Crawford says that when he was up for the position of Secretary of War, and to some extent Taylor was trying to fill this cabinet with people that would be acceptable to all sections. That's typically how you did it. And the Secretary of War was going to the Southern faction. He wanted Crawford. And Crawford said, he tells Zachary Taylor about the matter. Is that going to be a problem? And Taylor says, according to Crawford's account, it was not a problem. He had a right to pursue whatever cases he had been working on as a private lawyer.
This links Taylor to what is really a matter that has absolutely nothing to do with him. According to Elbert Smith, what Taylor most likely thought he was telling Crawford is that he could still practice law. Like, you can still have your cases. He didn't specifically tell Crawford, you can go ahead and sue the United States government. And as there's more outrage about this amount that's being paid, there's more and more questions. For the public, it seemed like a raid on the Treasury. And not one, but 3 officers seemed to be involved. The Attorney General covers everything legally, so he's getting involved. This was no small matter. So the House actually votes to condemn this payment being made. They approve the original payment to the family, but they condemn the extra interest payment. And they recommend laws that would prevent a cabinet secretary from pursuing a case before the court against the administration that they're part of. The administration's own supposedly friendly newspaper, The Republic, condemns this payment too. The House's final report, it does investigate this matter, is some relief. It says only Crawford is responsible. Reverdy Johnson, Meredith are not part of a corruption scheme. Though this never should have happened, they weren't part of any agreed-on conspiracy. From Taylor's point of view, eventually Taylor would decide that parts of his cabinet must go. So, as all the debates we're going to talk about, and this is a part of the story that doesn't get talked about much, as all the debates are going on, there was a vote to censure the president. The president's got a lot of enemies in Congress, and it comes awfully close to winning. We'll get into all this in the next episode.